So thank you, Sarah. So welcome. This is the Service Integration Committee. We have a guest presenter today, and it's around kind of our level setting process that we're doing at the start of this reemergence of this committee. So welcome Ellen Johnson, who's going to present on the Workforce Commission. And we'll have some group discussion, and we'll go from there. If you want to go ahead and do roll call, Sarah.
Yep. All right. So I'm just going to read the names on the participant list and Zoom how they show up. So, and if you don't hear your name, please go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll make sure that you're marked down as present. So Molly Cook, Becky Raymond, Kathy Olson Tracy,
Yes.
Laura Dom, Brian Richard, Sarah Goldhammer, Justin Arnold, Ellen Johnson, Carrie Thomas, Caitlin McGovern, Stacy Kregel, Drew Thompson, Courtney Geiger, Janice Taylor Brown, Rena Bryson, Todd Lowry, Kate Lindgren. I'm so sorry if I'm butchering your name too. Just let me know and I will adjust. Kit White, Amy Julian, and Lisa Jones. Again, if you didn't hear your name, go ahead and put it in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So just as we kick off these meetings, I just want to reemphasize our community agreements to keep customers central to the discussion, to take and make space so that we have an evenly balanced conversation, to avoid jargon, and no silly questions, and together we know a lot. Also to kind of, we've all been at meetings all day, just to kind of reorient us to this group. This work group priorities are to integrate service delivery, to improve access and opportunity for all populations, cross-agency collaboration, and reviewing the 2019 assessment that was done before COVID. So at our last meeting, Brian Richards, Richard from NIU, gave us a review of the 2019 self-assessment and drew out some common themes for us. There was a conversation about identifying initial barriers, and here's a list of things that kind of came out from the group. And one next step request was to make sure that whatever is happening in this group is also aligned with the Commission on Workforce Equity and Access, our new acronym CWEA. And so Ellen is here to kind of loop us all in. I know some are familiar already, others this might be new for, but just again, for level setting for the entire group. I'm excited to hear Ellen's presentation. And this is where we are to better understand the commission and how it relates to the work of this committee. And from here, we will turn it over for a second to Kathy Olson Tracy, who is going to share a customer persona with us, just again to ground us in what happens if we get this right. How does this impact the individuals that we serve? And then turn it over to Kathy.
Hi guys. I didn't write one up. I have one. But to get this persona, I went to my programs and asked them for real world experiences so I can convey the experience of a student. Certainly, as I was looking through the examples I was given, there are pockets of wonderful successes, but I chose to highlight one that wasn't as successful so that we can talk about the miscommunications and misunderstandings and processes to serve students caught in these spaces of miscommunication. So I'm going to go with a student named Will. Will was going back for his basic education, has 3 children and needs to support them. Will was interested in participating in an IET at one of the local community colleges. However, at that particular community college, the relationships between all of the people at the table were not as strong as they could be in other places. An IET is an integrated education and training program where our students are fast-tracked into careers and credential attainment so they can become sustainably employed. These are at the core of all that we do in adult basic education, is improving the talent pipeline across the state. Unfortunately, again, pockets of excellence everywhere, but I'm choosing one that didn't work as well, simply so we can figure out how to make this better. So Will wanted to go on to school and to join the IET, but this particular program could not find any supports outside of the program to help pay for his training materials, or other areas that he needed. So they didn't know necessarily how to correctly tap into their partnerships across the state. They also didn't fully understand, once Will was turned down for services, they didn't know what steps he needed to take to be able to get ready. Did he need to show a certain percentage of attendance in class, a level gains improvement? So we had one student who was intentional and wanting to move forward within a training program so that he could become credentialed and employed. But the system didn't exactly work in alignment at that time. He was told that students were not being served out of any titles until after he had obtained his GED. So there's a bit of miscommunication about who is eligible for what and where those miscommunication steps are. So Will was not able to join an IET program, which hindered his success in the adult education program. So these are students who, at the boots on the ground level, there seems to be some miscommunication about who is eligible for what services and what steps that student needs to take to become eligible. And in this case, the system was not as responsive to this student's needs. And this is actually a true scenario. So we do have, again, I want to reiterate to everybody on this call, pockets of absolute excellence where we're collaborating and working together. But I chose to focus on an area where we could come together and troubleshoot and help us figure out how to move these students into these services.
Well, that is a great segue. Thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing that vignette. I'm sure everyone has similar stories. So before I turn it over to Ellen, we wanted to kind of plant some seeds in everyone's mind before Ellen presents, so that as she talks about the work of the commission, that we are thinking where this group could lend support, inform, bring things to light. So if you, as she talks, will just bear in mind what rules and policies and procedures create unnecessary barriers. I mean, I think, Kathy's story just really frames that. What entities are you aware of that provide the professional development? Are there specific PD topics that are needed? More about professional development and, collecting feedback is going to come up too. So just to kind of, frame her remarks about what this committee could do in alignment with the commission is, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Ellen from here. Welcome, Ellen.
Thanks, Becky. It's nice to be with you all this afternoon. I feel like I know most of the folks on the call, but not everyone. So just by way of introduction, I'm Ellen Johnson. I work with Afton Partners, which was serving as the project facilitation team for the Governor's Commission on Workforce Equity and Access. And so help to facilitate meetings and working groups and sort of move the group towards its final report and recommendations. So happy to be here today. I'm also joined by my colleague, Caitlin McGovern, who has joined Afton more recently as well. So I know some of you on this call were a part of the commission, either on the actual commission sort of formally or participating in some of the work groups that we formed. And so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about our process of the commission and jump to the end where we got to our recommendations and some of the outcomes from the commission's process. So you can see here on this screen is the vision statement that was developed by the commission. And this was born out of a human-centered design process that took into account different personas that were developed and customer journey maps were created for each of 9 different personas to really understand and identify what are the pain points that job seekers might have accessing any of our workforce development system services across the state. Focus groups with job seekers who had been through the workforce development system, as well as job seekers who didn't even know that the workforce development system existed, as well as employers, frontline staff across all 4 titles of WEOA. We talked with a lot of different folks, really to get to a point to say, what does the workforce system currently, as it exists currently, look like? And what would we like it to look like moving forward? And so you can see here, I'm not going to read this vision aloud, but this is sort of the newly revised vision of what we think Illinois' workforce services and what our workforce development system should look like. And a lot of that, as you can see, has to do with connecting folks with resources, being that first stop for folks who are looking for ways to engage with fulfilling work and connecting all workers with the opportunities that they deserve. So as that vision statement was developed from some of the pain points that were identified, also solutions started to be identified. So we called those design enhancements. So starting to think about what are some of the fixes, whether that be programmatic, policy, sort of infrastructure changes that could be made that would allow Illinois to better realize this vision of workforce services for all job seekers across the state. And so we'll talk about that in just a second, but the commission came up with a sort of long laundry list of design enhancement recommendations that are being sort of moved forward to varying degrees. So once we did that, our sort of third and final piece was to determine what are the enabling conditions that need to be in place. So what is the governance, funding, and infrastructure that needs to be in place in order for the state to enact any of these design enhancement recommendations coming out of the commission. And so that's where our funding infrastructure governance working group had come together, along with some input from other stakeholders, agency directors, et cetera, to really think about what a new governance structure could look like. And there are 2 main recommendations that came out of that group. The first is the development of a chief workforce officer position that would be embedded at the state level in one of the deputy governor's portfolios, likely budget and economy. And this would be a newly created position that would allow the state to have sort of more involvement and input and collaboration with the folks that are already doing the workforce services. That was a theme that we heard loud and clear, that there was a desire for the governor's office to be more involved in the workforce services. And so that's a sort of direct recommendation in response to the feedback we heard there. And then the second big sort of governance infrastructure change that was recommended was a revitalization of the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, so the state IWIB. And so we're in the process now of adding some more detail to what that could look like. But we heard a lot throughout the process of the commission that appointments to the IWIB have gone vacant for several years. And so we'll be looking at sort of what a reappointment could look like. Also looking across the IWIB to see what are its current strengths and how can those be leveraged with the development of this new Chief Workforce Officer, and how could the IWIB and this new CWO position work in tandem and together in order to push forward the vision that you see here on this screen. So I'm here today really to, I was invited by Becky and Sarah to talk a bit about the commission process, but also to specifically bring it into focus for the Service Integration Committee in terms of how this group in particular could help advance any of the recommendations that came out of the commission. And certainly there were a lot of recommendations and design enhancements identified that would fall under the category of service integration and how we could better work together and across all of our different agencies and systems. And so I wanted to lift up 3 in particular. I think, Sarah, if we go to that next slide. Yeah, so there are 3 that I wanted to put forward today just for the start of conversation. So the first that came out was to identify those rules, policies, and procedures that create unnecessary steps for users to access system services, to document why they might be burdensome and offer potential changes or solutions for consideration. So one of the things that we'd like the sort of revitalized IWIB to really focus on is thinking about elevating any sort of federal rules, policies, procedures that create these unnecessary steps that an advocacy agenda could be created around, identifying any levers at the state level that could be modified to reduce some of the unnecessary steps that users might have to go through, and same with local areas as well. And so I'm just sort of thinking about identifying what those are, and if there are particular fixes or solutions that might be brainstormed to address some of those unnecessary steps, lifting those up to the Chief Workforce Officer would be useful to sort of moving that forward. The second recommendation is conducting a landscape scan of entities that are currently providing professional development training to the workforce development field. So noting the strengths and weaknesses, what content is covered, where there might be gaps in training, identifying other potential training providers that could cover that content or those gaps that were identified in the commission. A lot of the training that was identified for frontline staff had to do with resiliency training, sort of cultural competency, humility, trauma-informed care training. So a lot of the pieces in terms of how you interact with users and providing that kind of training. So, thinking about how some sort of training program might be implemented across the state for providers. One of the first steps that would be necessary is really doing a landscape scan of what exists. How is that working? Where are there gaps? Where do people go for training? How might we leverage, the strengths that and the providers that are already providing training, that sort of thing, which could be an opportunity for this group to provide some of that data up to the new Chief Workforce Officer once hired. And then finally, the third is developing replicable protocols for collecting feedback from users about their experience and identify best practices for incorporating it into program improvements and employee performance expectations. So certainly the commission used a human-centered design process in developing its recommendations and want to keep that spirit alive as we move towards this new vision for the state. And so I know several local groups have spent time thinking about how feedback is collected. And so lifting up some of those best practices and specifically then moving into the next part of that sentence, which is helping providers incorporate that feedback into any sort of program improvements, or thinking about what that might look like for employee performance expectations, and things like that, I think would be really useful as well. So I'm going to pause here because I'd love to hear reactions or questions about any of this. But again, as I was invited to come, I was trying to think specifically about ways that this group might enhance or sort of push forward some of the commission recommendations that would really be helpful to this new chief workforce officer once hired. And these were the three that emerged. Certainly for folks that are on this call that were also part of the commission, if you have other recollections or memory of design enhancements that you heard that you think this group might be well positioned to tackle, I'd be open to having those recommendations shared as well. So again, I will pause and open it. I see some hands. Let's see, Justin, I saw your hand first.
Sure. If I was thinking about the vision and the recommendations, I think a lot of it makes sense and is applicable. That's just a reflection. And thinking about, I would go to Michigan Works WorkNet centers, and when I was at Nebraska Works workforce centers in North Carolina. And then I came here 2 years ago, and it was kind of a similar thing. And the same thing would happen in every center, which is you'd walk in and you'd say, I need help, but you wouldn't know what help you needed.
Mhm.
And you knew that you needed a job, or you knew you needed a career, or you knew you needed an educational pathway, but you didn't know what any of that meant. But it said Michigan Works or Nebraska Works or Illinois WorkNet in front of the door, and someone said, go there. And so you'd go there looking for help, and they'd say, well, what do you want? And you'd go, I don't know. And they'd say, well, do you want to see IDS? Do you want to see doors? Do you want to go to job training? And you go, I don't know. I just need help kind of figuring this out. And I think, and then they wouldn't be able to help you because you didn't pick off the list that they had available. And when I came here, that's what was happening sometimes when people would walk in to our one step, is we were used to just kind of serving customers based on an appointment they had or a really specific need that they had, and then getting them to the right person. And then if they wanted WEA specific services, meaning Title I, we would talk to them about, well, what on the eligible training provider list, what program do you want to go to? And if they could pick a program, we'd, have them apply so they could go into the thing that they already picked. All this is not new information to anyone else, but that gets me to the point of identify rules and policies and conduct a landscape of entities, the first two recommendations. What we did was we looked around for we said, what are we actually trying to do? And what we're trying to do is serve people, not assuming, but being aware that they might be unfamiliar with jobs and careers and services. And so we want to be more open to a conversation, and to get our staff to be part of that conversation, we had to do two things. One, we had to do more intentional work on the front line with, to your point, eligibility and services, so that we could be a better source of navigation between community partners for clients. And then the other thing we had to do was invest in some training. And so when we think about career services training, we did a landscape scan, and what we landed on was the National Career Development Association. They have the career services provider training. And the career services, it's a class called Facilitating Career Development, and it's around helping skills and getting labor market information and career development theory, et cetera. And so we got our staff going through that, and you can probably see that going from someone walking in to checking off a list or knowing who they should have an appointment with, to I'm going to listen to this person, I'm going to understand my partners, and I'm going to help this person develop their career through this training that I'm receiving. We're positioned to be better. So I would say that some of the rules, policies, procedures, and some of the training, a lot of that is just training frontline staff to realize that they're there to provide career services, almost career counseling. And then the training that seems best for that is the National Career Development Association's Facilitating Career Development training. It touches on a lot of competencies for a career service provider. So I think there is, as I'm looking at this, there is just real practical, immediate solutions that can be implemented, and we're trying to implement them here. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that feedback, Justin. I appreciate it. I'll just add to a couple, as you were talking, a couple other things that didn't make it onto this slide, but that were certainly design enhancement recommendations coming out of the commission that the sort of will be moved forward at a later date. One is related to the marketing. So making sure that the marketing of our system is more unified so that folks hopefully coming into our centers have a better understanding of what it is they might be able to access. And certainly you spoke to the training piece. And then there was also a specific design enhancement related to this idea of navigation and having navigators that could better support folks in getting them connected to the right entry point, as they enter our services. So thanks for that. Carrie, I see your hand.
Got ahead of Todd.
Oh, you did.
And I'm going to go ahead of Todd, even though it is his birthday. Just going to let him.
Happy birthday.
But one thing, so on the navigation thing, I was going to say, I think another inventory or landscape scan would be of all the different navigation stuff that's happening in the workforce field, but also adjacent to workforce. So that's just, I would just add that as a useful activity for a new chief workforce officer coming in. The other thing I would say is something that's come up. I don't know how familiar people are with this, but a couple of state agencies, including unemployment insurance at IDS, uses iLogin. And one of the things that came up early in the commission from the stakeholder group was that people have to keep, like with all different state programs, they have to keep proving things about themselves. And so that ended up like, here's my income level, here's my family size, it's just constantly having to prove who you are. And there were some ideas that came up. And somebody internally at IDS wondered, is iLogin, which is a state system that 3 or 4 state agencies now use for their programs, is there an opportunity there? So I don't understand all the details of it, but I just want to put that on the table as in that first category, like of a procedure that might end up being useful. I don't know, because I don't know the extent to which, like every state entity, like, do you have to be a state agency to use it, or can you be ICCB? The last thing I would say is, Ellen, could you address, because I think Todd might be about to ask this question, could you address the fact that the vision statement and a lot of the design enhancements are very job seeker focused or appear or read that way? And could you talk a little bit about how the employer customer was discussed in the commission's work, just because I anticipated that there would be some people in this group who would wonder about that.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good question. So as the commission was formed, its primary purpose was really to better understand the user experience, and user sort of first and foremost for this commission was being defined as the job seeker. That being said, it became very clear as we went through the process that a lot of the pain points that were identified for job seekers were similar pain points that employers also felt in interacting with the system. So for example, job seekers either didn't know our services existed, didn't know how to get connected to the right services. They were kind of burdensome, or there was a lot of paperwork, like it was hard to understand. And so there was a lot of, similarity, as we went through this process. We did run some specific focus groups with employers that had been a part of the system, that had used the workforce services to varying degrees. And then we also convened more of like an employer voice group. So we had some folks from the IWIB come and talk about, their experience and, some of the employers that they had worked with more specifically. And so that allowed us to get a bit more insight into what the sort of connection and overlap is between the pain points across both users of the system. And so as the commission had its conversations and discussions, a lot of where we landed was that any changes that we are making to the system to solve for the job seeker pain points would likely have either sort of ripple benefits for employers and or would be a sort of prototype that we could then also implement a solution for employers that looked similar or would solve a similar problem. So I hope that helps a little bit in terms of how we approached the dual customer and thinking about that as we went through the commission. And Todd, I'm going to ask, I'll turn it over to you. I don't know if that was actually your question, if Carrie surmised it, or if you have a different question.
Yeah, so Carrie knows me pretty well, and she knows my thought process, and sometimes I get one track mind on things. So, it is that employer component to me. If you want the fish to survive, you got to have water in the lake, so we need that. We need them, and we need them very involved and connected. So yeah, that's part of it. And the second thing, if you could go back to that last slide, those three starting points. I really, really am excited to find out what this landscape scan is going to consist of, because I have not seen a consistent training programs for workforce providers for professional development outside of what we've kind of created ourselves through webinars and Workforce Wednesdays and things like that. So it'd be interesting to know, are you looking at what might be available through, say, a procured contract with workforce development trainers, or is there other ideas surrounding that?
Yeah, I mean, and this is, I'll just be clear, this is my take on what this landscape scan could look like, but I would define it much broader than that. So it would be any entity that is currently providing that workforce staff turn to for professional development. And so whether that is, sort of through the WEA system, whether that is through a college university system, whether it's through a community-based organization that has developed its own training. Full disclosure, I worked at the Chicago Jobs Council, which had the Frontline Focus Training Institute, which was its own set of professional development for the field. There are, numerous other sort of intermediaries or advocacy type organizations that offer training around trauma-informed care or racial equity that folks might be turning to. And so I think I would be imagining that this landscape scan would be sort of writ large and seeing where folks tend to gravitate towards to get their training, just so we could see what exists.
That's great. And I'll leave with, I really think that these three recommendations are wonderful. And I think that if, it's going to be very attractive to those of us that do the work that you start with the foundational approach like this. So I'm very impressed with what you have here. And I think we can all kind of grab that rope and start pulling in that direction. So thanks so much.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Todd. And happy birthday.
Yeah, and I have to leave. Sorry, I've got to go.
All right, thanks, Todd.
Becky and Sarah, I don't know if it's helpful if you want to go back to the questions that you had pulled up originally, if you want folks to kind of react to this. I think part of the intention behind presenting these recommendations is thinking a bit about what this service integration work group could do or could run with, or if there's an appetite to push any of these recommendations forward as part of your work plan, or as you think ahead to what you'll be accomplishing over the next several months. But I'd be happy to move into those reflection questions if you'd like to pull them up.
Oh, well, you want to just advance those couple slides, Sarah? Yeah, because we have them here a little bit more fleshed out, and a bit more detail. But what are the rules and policies? What are the professional development entities? What's missing? What are the specific topics? And yeah, thoughts? Yes, Kit. Yeah.
Hey everyone, Kit White with LWEA 7. So I just wanted to go back to something that Carrie already talked about. It is our customers having to prove who they are over and over again. We all know that people have to go through eligibility multiple times for every program, and every program has its own rules that it has to follow. This isn't news, but I think as the service integration committee, Carrie's spot on. That's something that we can and should be tackling, is is there a good way to streamline that process so that people don't have to walk through eligibility, proving who they are over and over?
Yes.
Thanks, Kip.
I think as I look at this list, I think that a lot of the experts that could speak to this are really those that are doing the work. I think it would be really, really interesting to find out from the different organizations, especially number one. I think they could tell you exactly what policies are difficult or create burdens. And I think there are many of us that have created really dynamic training programs because we haven't found what we needed. So we created it. So I think a lot of these, that survey could really help highlight some best practices and some things that are working well and not working so well in the field.
Great, thanks, Courtney. Yeah, Kathy.
Well, I hear everything we're saying, and I'm excited about the energy that's coming forward, and I'm excited about the passion that we're trying to do to make this a better system. But so much of what we do is a part of WEOA and federal law. So I can tell you exactly what policies are causing pain points for my programs, but I can also tell you they're steeped in federal law. And they're not going to go away. So my concern is so much of what I see and the recommendations. I guess I understood that the commission was actually going to answer those questions and have that plan and have the recommendations for the policies. I didn't realize that it was going to continue to cycle back. So I guess I'm looking at, so much of what we're talking about is laid out in federal law. So I don't know that we have the ability to change that. What we have is the ability to work within a system and strengthen those partnerships at the local level so that once a person walks in that door, we have practices, again, at the local level that support that individual and help funnel them into the pathway. But I guess I'm really struggling, and maybe I'm missing some of the information, but I'm kind of struggling with, I think that's already been laid out with the entire year-long, almost year and a half, Equity Commission looking at all of these. So I'm a little bit at a loss of where these are continually going and what we've actually been able to determine, here's what we're going to do for next steps. It's more of just an observation.
Yeah, and Kathy, maybe I can answer some of that. I don't know if I can answer the latter piece of where this group is going to take it, but I think sort of twofold. One, certainly yes, like during the commission process, a lot of the pain points that were identified for users led sort of directly to like, oh, well, if we could fix this, then that would help this, right? So a lot of that has been lifted up. And that is being coalesced into this final report. So it has been captured and is building on, like you said, the work of the equity task force and, the conversations that have been happening so far. So it's at a state level, it's determining where do we have, within sort of our guardrails or within our purview, where does the state have the ability to make any changes that would make things easier for job seekers or make things easier for you all as providers to work together. And so there are some areas where that could happen. To your bigger question about sort of the federal requirements and having less control over, what that looks like, I think part of the hope of this commission would be that lifting up what some of those things are for an advocacy agenda for the state to then advocate for different changes to say, like, this is not something that is working for, our job seekers, or this is causing undue burden, and having that cataloged in some way so that it could be elevated to, a federal level, I think is something that we would be interested in. I don't know if that is helpful, but I hear you on feeling a bit stymied by, well, we're operating within this law and these requirements, and that dictates, only so much of what we can change. And so I think we're trying to figure out what our levers are on both levels.
And I guess I figured rather than asking and having discussion about what the rules are, I would have, and policies that get in the way, I would have presumed that would have happened before the recommendations were made. When we're discussing what are the entities that provide professional development, those would have been part of the review process. So I guess I'm stuck at like, what is it you need from us to move forward? And that's where I'm trying to see the pieces together. I thought all of these questions were going to be addressed in that commission, and then we would be able to react to that and put the processes in place that would move our system forward. What I'm interpreting from this conversation is that there's still a lot of things that haven't been determined, haven't been figured out yet, because it's a complicated system that haven't been figured out yet. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what you need from this committee to move things forward. So it seems to be hard to put policy in place from this committee when we're still trying to answer some of these questions.
Yeah, before I answer that, I'm going to see, Carrie, I saw your hand raised, and I don't know if you have a response to.
Yeah, I think I just say, Kathy, I'm somebody who wasn't on the commission, but I did witness probably 2/3 of the deliberations, whether it was a full commission or one of the committees. And I hear you loud and clear about what a lot of people would have anticipated could have happened over this year. And I will say one thing, this is just me speaking. It is not a small thing that one of the things that came out of this was a recommendation to have a position in the governor's office, essentially, that would be like a leader on, like the amount, the shift in buy-in and the importance of workforce, and the fact that it is in multiple places, and we need one person who wakes up every day thinking it's my responsibility to make sure that we're all working towards the same goals, even though we are in different places in state government. I saw that as a big shift. So I just want to say that out loud. I think you're right. You're 100% right. Like, it is hard for us as this committee to like kind of answer these questions, but it is useful to see that we are still kind of in this place where we're deliberating about this. And I think that it's like a huge opportunity to look at those federal rules that seem immovable to us, but if we thought a little bit about, is there a creative way, a different way to implement some of those rules that are less burdensome? And so thank you, Courtney, for raising up this issue about people having to prove their eligibility over and over again, because there should be a way, not only let's have a, everybody thinks the shared data system will solve all our problems, which I don't think it will be improvements, but if we did have a way for people to essentially have a passport or some way that says, yes, I am who I am the same person who I was when I was at TANF, I'm the same person who I was when I enrolled in that WEA Title I program 3 years ago, and now I need, something different, like that there could be some infrastructure solution to that. And I don't think that's the only example, but those are sort of really practical things. And it's also not a small thing to have a more specific sort of state advocacy agenda on the federal level, because those federal deliberations, those policy deliberations happen, and then we're all like, what do you want to tell them? Next week, we got to tell our congressional delegation XYZ. And it's like, well, let's have that all teed up and ready to go, and all speak from the same, because all of our, anyway, I could go on and on, but I hear you about the expectations going into this.
Well, and I guess I'm trying to wrap, like, what does that mean for this particular group? Because we've always had the IWIB as that central leadership that needs to focus moving forward. Okay, so the recommendations are to switch that up a little bit. Okay, that is fine. We're gonna switch it up a little bit, and there's gonna be a delegate in charge. Okay. So what does this service integration group then do with that? Because what we all care about for this conversation, because many of us wear multiple hats and we have different types of roles and different responsibilities. But in this conversation for this work group, my focus is those Title II students who need to access services and the boots on the ground who are misunderstanding and or unaware or trying to make this work for the system. How do we support that? So I think what our task is, as I understand it for the service work group, is to come up with policy that's going to be implemented statewide so that we can reduce these barriers. So if we're still having conversations about what those barriers are, then it's going to be difficult for us to come up with policies to address that. And that's, I guess, where I'm stuck, because this group needs to be able to walk away from our task that we have been assigned with policy recommendations that can be implemented at the local level so that an individual walking into our center, our system, has the services they need. And we need to do that built on the recommendations from this commission. And where I'm just stuck is I don't see recommendations that we can then come back and say, okay, this is what we need to work on. So here's how we're going to build policy around it. So I'm struggling with seeing how we get to our end result. I don't disagree that advocacy is a strong need. And I understand the role here, but it again falls outside of what I think this group is tasked with. So how do I take these questions and give you meaningful responses in our monthly meetings that we walk away with policy that tucks my student Will, that gets him into services that he's eligible for, but it was misunderstood? Or was the misunderstanding on the Title II person and he wasn't eligible for those services? So how do we fix that and build that integration at the local level, which is what I think we're tasked with.
So, Ellen, will the report have responses to these questions? I mean, is there a list of what the rules policy, like, is that going to be in the report, or is that still like an open question that needs to be answered?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there will be some of that in the report, certainly that was identified through the customer journey maps and the focus groups, and, identifying. So yes, some of that will be in there. I think these are questions for discussion of this group today, not necessarily questions that need to be answered as part of the commission's process. So like if we go back a slide, what I would say, and perhaps my understanding of this group, since I'm new, was a little different, Kathy, than yours around like creating policy. I think where I was thinking this group could be particularly helpful is thinking about, as we're trying to get the system to talk better together and to work better together, is there data that you all could help like facilitate the collection of or provide that would supplement the recommendations coming out of the commission? So for example, that second one on this landscape scan of entities that provide professional development, does this group have the capacity, interest, willingness to conduct that landscape scan, to do a survey of, workforce professionals to understand this better, that could then be handed over to a new chief workforce officer so that a training policy could be put in place, for example. So I think and it's not for me to answer, it's for, you all as a group to determine sort of what you have the interest or capacity in, or if that matches with what, you think this group should be doing, certainly. But that's sort of where I was coming at this.
Thank you. Thanks, Ellen. Kit?
Hey, thanks, Becky. Could I address a different discussion question that relates to the third point on this slide, the developing replicable protocols for collecting feedback? Because I think in LWEA 7, we are starting to have a really great protocol in place, thanks to Becky is too modest, and so is Stacy. But Becky and her team at Scale Lit, Stacy Kriegel, who's here, was instrumental in implementing our new customer service satisfaction survey in LWEA 7. So she can speak in more detail about how it actually works, but from a big picture perspective, doing a survey at the one-stop operator level is so helpful because they're surveying everyone who walks into the American Job Center. It's not Title I surveying our own customers and holding on to that data. It's the OSO surveying everyone, regardless of why they originally walked in, what program they ended up enrolling in, and then all of the partners have access to that data. So the survey responses are shared with everybody, which means if I'm Title I and someone comes in and gives me a really bad review, everyone can see that. And I think that's really valuable. We're getting a ton of response. I think the other thing that works really well about what they've implemented is that it's available on a QR code that's posted everywhere in the AJC, so people can do it on their phone really quickly. Again, Stacy can talk in more detail about it, but I think having that happen through the one-stop operator as opposed to each individual partner collecting the feedback is potentially a really great replicable protocol for collecting feedback from our users, because we serve the same customers.
Thanks,
Great.
Kit.
Thanks, Kit. And yeah, so and okay, this is a good example. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on the chat. Kathy is saying there is a professional development group. Wait, did I miss that? And so maybe they should be owning the second
Yeah, the
bullet.
professional development work group that is focused on this, it has representation from all the WEOA partners. They would be the ones in position to do the landscape scan for professional development, because that's their forte and they know all of the pieces on that, and that's where that comes from. So I would take that and put it in that professional development. And I agree with what Kit said, and I agree, I saw Carrie kind of respond in agreement with that, and I agree that that is important. But I would possibly suggest that goes to the performance work group, because that's the data they use all the time and they're working through it. So that might be the right work group for that.
Well, I'm going to be the timekeeper and I'd say this is a really great conversation. We're 6 minutes out, and what I'm hearing is we kind of have a question mark on what is the purpose of this group and where it's going to go before we can make concrete work plans. Is that what I'm hearing? Like, who is our audience? Who do we want to reach out to? What is the scope? So that we're meaningful as, we carry on our work forward. Is that a step that we need to take?
I thought we had our task assigned when this group came back together. Becky, am I misunderstanding? Wasn't that a task that we were brought together for a specific purpose?
Yeah, the purpose is, at the right there. Thank you. Yeah, I just think that as we got started, it just seems like the landscape is changing so much here in Illinois with this. So, this is really an effort to make sure that we're crosswalking all of the various initiatives and things that are going on and aligning. So I don't know, Kathy, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think this makes sense. I think we have our marching orders here, what our priorities are. I think we know what our work group is designated to do. But I don't necessarily, I think some of the conversations today are incredibly important, but they might just be outside of this group. And what I thought we were supposed to be doing was creating that strategy, that policy across the state for service integration at the local level. So I think we just have to talk about what our deliverable is going to be. What is that finished product.
And it looks like Justin, you have your hand raised.
Yep. For the purpose of this group, it seemed like, to someone's point earlier, there's a lot of federal regulation around what we do. And the federal regulation basically says partners should cooperate, a one-stop should lead and organize, and then there should be career services with Title I and some Wagner-Pizer funds, and then you should listen to feedback. We don't really need to create a new policy or a new rule. We need to know, why doesn't the thing that we're supposed to be doing work here? And if this group can go, why don't partners cooperate? Why can't a one-stop operator get partners to cooperate and commit? Why don't people in a place already provide career services and provide navigation when they're getting paid to? And why aren't we already using customer feedback? If we can understand why the system is broken, we don't need to make a new system. We don't need to make a new position. We just need to understand why in our state does this not work? And if we can understand that, we can have a recommendation from this group.
That's a really good point, Justin. Okay.
Yes. And okay. Okay, so we will be back in touch. I'm sure we're practically at time. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I want to thank Ellen for coming in and sharing the presentation with us. It gives us a lot of food for thought, and it it's important for us to keep it on our radar as we move forward. We'll be in touch before the next meeting with some next steps. I know last time we talked about a survey, and it was survey who, survey what. Well, I feel like I want to survey all of you and make sure that we have alignment and, kind of think through the priorities, the current landscape, any of the things that came up from the commission that could be relevant to this group, or maybe some of these things should be, suggested to other groups, but you'll be hearing from me soon. Okay.
All right.
Hi, Becky. Sorry to come in late. I came in at the end. My name is Christy George. I'm the First Assistant Deputy Governor for Budget and Economy. So it's great to hear many of your voices and perspectives. And again, apologies that I came in at the tail end. It sounds like there's some question as to what exactly the purpose is here, and whether that aligns with the Governor's Commission on Workforce Equity and Access and some of the things that our office has been talking about as it relates to workforce development. So I'm happy to have conversations with you as you guys kind of decide or survey and figure out exactly what pathway you are choosing to go. But I think from the governor's office, I'd love to be engaged and to help provide direction on this front if it's helpful.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for joining us, Christy. It's nice to meet you. And yeah, we will definitely be taking you up on that offer. So look forward to connecting.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch shortly. And our next meeting is October 18th, 1 to 2 p.m. All right. Bye all.
Bye. Thanks.
Becky and Sarah.